when it's the right co-founder, it's definitely easier. Have complementary skill sets and you're heading towards the same direction. When that's not aligned, it actually is easier to be a solo rather than trying to solve the issue of misalignment at the top and then trying to run the organization at the same time.
Welcome back, everybody. Rich Brubaker, mission-driven entrepreneur, here today with another episode of the Mission Driven Podcast. This episode, I'm honored to be joined by Sabrina Mustopo, who's the founder and CEO of Krakakao, a farmer-to-bar social enterprise working directly with small shareholder cocoa farmers and producing award-winning Indonesian chocolate. Sabrina, thank you very much for taking the time to meet with us. As a starting point, it'd be great just to hear a little bit of an introduction about yourself and the work that you're doing.
So my name is Sabrina, as Rich said. So I started Krakakoa about 10 years ago. In my former life, I started as a management consultant working in the area of sustainable agriculture and economic development. I was really attracted to work in the agriculture industry because of all the different issues that needed to be solved. How do we use agriculture as a tool for development? How do we think about economic development in a sustainable and equitable manner? And that has a lot of links back to agriculture. So I did that for about 6 years, and then subsequently felt that I was doing enough PowerPoint slides to last a lifetime, and decided, okay, let's try to see if I can actually do any of this work that I've been recommending, and jumped to the entrepreneurial side of things and started Krakakoa.
What catalyzed you to make the jump? Just you had enough financial security? Did you have enough of an idea? Was it just time? Like,
I think the main thing was I was not sure how much impact the work I was doing in consulting was actually having. Because as a consultant, you make recommendations, but whether any of that get implemented at the end of the day is, out of your hands. And after so many years of doing that, you kind of question, well, is this actually making any difference at all? That was the main catalyst for me to go, okay, fine, I need to do something different.
could you introduce Krakakawa, the mission, the organization itself, and a little bit about the products that you have?
So with Indonesia, or in the context of Indonesia, the problems that we're trying to solve, firstly, are issues with low farmer income. Indonesia has pretty low productivity, something like 300 kilos per hectare, as opposed to in West Africa, it can go up to 800, 110 per hectare.
Wow.
So when you just don't produce enough cocoa per hectare, you don't make a lot of money. The second issue is around environmental sustainability. Historically, we've given up a lot of our forest areas for agricultural land. We have to find a way to to create economic opportunities for people at the bottom of so as to stop deforestation from happening as well. And that's the second problem that we're trying to solve. And the third one is about quality. When we started, Indonesia was the third largest producer of cocoa beans in the world, but the chocolate that you would find on supermarket shelves in Indonesia, that's made in Indonesia, were largely not, super high quality. And I was kind of confused, like, why is that? We have so much cocoa. Some of it must be good, right? And some of it must be good enough to produce high quality cocoa. So that's also the other thing that we try to solve for. So the way that we work is, it's actually simple. The way that we solve all this problem, it's an integration of the value chain. So we do everything from training the farmers, providing them with equipment, tools, and then we buy the cocoa beans from them at a much higher price compared to the market price. And then we take the cocoa that we buy, we have our own factory here in Indonesia, and we convert that into chocolate bars. So in a way, it's quite simple, but it just involves being part of different segments of the value chain, which I think is the complicated part, and having to integrate and move all of that in tandem.
To me, actually, I'm thinking from a supply chain and product background, did it take you 10 years to get your first chocolate bar out? Because you're kind of going from the very beginning, OpEx, CapEx, going in up front. How did you get started? Like, what was the first maybe year and a half or 2 years of work, and how long did it take you to bring your product to market?
Bringing the first chocolate bar to market, or creating the first bar, was not the problem. Creating the first bar that somebody wanted to consume was the problem. My friends and family were, of course, guinea pigs, and they unfortunately had to taste a lot of really bad chocolate in the beginning. So I'd say it took us about a year. Then we had to figure out how do we get the manufacturing part right. And even though chocolate manufacturing is nothing innovative or new, I mean, we're producing that for a long time, right? Figuring out how to do that on a small scale was quite challenging. Nowadays, there's a lot of equipment that, hobbyist chocolate makers can get online. It's very easy. When we first started, that didn't, and the information on how do you produce chocolate on a small scale didn't exist. So a lot of trial and errors as well. We weren't ready to, put $10 million into a chocolate plant straight away. So it's how do we do this in the beginning when we're still trying to figure out proof of concept and whether there's a product market fit and all of that. So I would say, first product in the market that we're happy with took us about a year to a year and a half.
What were some of the other aspects of the business that you were working on at the same time? Like, were you already looking at branding? Were you looking at funding? Were you having to look at teams? Like, what were the early critical things that you were, as the founder, putting in place to bring the organization to where it is now?
Apart from the chocolate itself, the next thing would be how does it look? So the
Right.
packaging, the branding, with things that we worked on very, very early on as well.
Mhm.
Team wise, it was pretty lean in the beginning. So I had somebody on the factory, which was really a room in my house, right? And I think, yeah, we kind of ran with that in the beginning, like a salesperson, a designer, and somebody helping on the production.
What has been the investment you've been taking on, and how do you identify or how do you develop the right investment or the right investor partnership?
One of the things that I realized is that even in the impact VC space, there's a spectrum, right? And depending on where they're getting their source of money from, if
Mm.
it's coming from philanthropic sources, for example, the need to return on, or the need for return on the investment is a lot lower, but then the need on the impact side is a lot higher, right? And then you have those which is, I guess, a little bit more focused on just ticking the ESG boxes, right? Let's make sure that this investment does no harm, as all the ticks the ESG the boxes, but
Yeah.
a lot more focused on the financial returns. So I think even
Mhm.
identifying where impact investors sit within the spectrum is really important because it has to be aligned with what you're trying to do as a company. So we've had different forms of investment as well. Those that's pure debt, obviously that becomes a lot easy. They're not part of the equation once we've repaid. But
Yeah.
those that are equity or convertible notes, that's where we have to figure out as well. If they're not aligned, how do we allow them to exit the business? So we've had several rounds of fundraising. So we've had to structure it based on the needs of the company and also the needs and the requirements of the investors.
Mhm.
And I would say still a continuous learning process as we scale as well. The ticket sizes do get bigger, so it does require us to get money from different types of investors, and that's a whole new thing that we have to learn as well. More private equity style investors, how do they work versus VC type investors?
How much of the impact story or the social mission is core to your pitch?
I think we always start with the problem. Why are we here? Why do we exist? What's the problem that we're trying to solve, right? Why does the world need
Mm.
Krakakaoa? And we try to explain towards, the mid and the end part of the presentation why this makes good business sense as well. How consumers are thinking about their purchases and what builds brand loyalty to even on the B2B side of the business for our corporate off-takers. What are the commitments they've made and how do we actually help them to build their commitments and how do we actually close deals because we are because of the impact that the company has.
Mhm.
It starts, I think, yeah, really, this is the problem that we're trying to solve. A lot of it is social, environmental, but then it actually also does make good business sense.
That's great. And you mentioned that you're now looking at or well into a merger. What's going on? Like, where did that come from, and how do you see this as changing the organization, or what are the opportunities that you're hoping to create through this merger coming up?
So the merger is with a coffee company called Slow Forest Coffee,
Mm.
and they do essentially very similar work to what we're doing,
Mhm.
but on the coffee side and in Laos and Vietnam. The I think main difference is that
Mm.
Slow also owns and manage their own plantations, and they do monoculture conversion. So they buy monoculture coffee
Mm.
plantations and convert that into agroforestry plantations. The main market, as opposed to being domestic within Vietnam or Laos, like we are in Indonesia, their main market is over in Europe. So that
Okay.
came about because initially we
Mm.
saw what they were doing, and Europe is a really interesting market for us, given I think all the importance and emphasis on sustainability. Okay, so we thought, okay, let's see if they would be willing to sell chocolate as well, to their existing customers as opposed to just coffee. So as an
Mhm.
additional product they can sell, they can better utilize the sales team, and we also get access to new market. As the conversation kind of went on, we kind of realized that there's a lot more that we can do together rather than just them being, a distributor or an agent of our products there.
Yeah.
Operationally, there's a lot of things that we see being very synergistic. And then as a team as well, we're quite excited about, working together, very complementary skill sets, right? When we think
Mm.
about us being more focused on the B2C segment than on the B2B segment, we said, okay, that's complementary. When we think about
Yeah.
what they're strong at and what we're strong at, that's also complementary. So the more we talked about
Mm.
it, we said, okay, I think it benefits both our organizations if we go ahead and proceed with the merger. And that was a conversation that I think took about 4 months to even start
Wow.
going from okay, it's a sales to potentially a merger, and then subsequently, like it's been another 6 to 8 months, kind of wrapping up terms, all of that, how we're going to work together, what's the
Mm.
structure of the organization going to be like? Yeah, it's still ongoing, but we're hoping to close it Q3 of this year.
That's going to bring a whole new set of challenges in terms of like shared mission, the organizational culture. What are some of the things that you're thinking through now about alignment and, making sure it's the right partnership and the right opportunity?
Yeah, so I think for sure we had a meeting with the board to talk
Mhm.
about all of these things, right? What's the mission of this joint organization? What exactly do we want to aspire towards? Why even talking about our whys? Why are we doing this? How long do we want to be doing this for? Are we just talking about cocoa and chocolate? So cocoa and coffee or something else as well down the line? How big do we want this organization to be? So we had
Right.
a meeting to talk about all these, I think, high level goals, and turns out that most of it, I think all of it, we're aligned on. So that's really good. And when it came to operationalizing it, this is where we talk about, okay, what would be my new role in this overall organization, right? How do I contribute and what do I take over?
Mm,
How do we actually put the two organizations together? Do we kind of keep it separate, or is
mm.
it like a full merger where the sales department of both teams are going to be merged into one? All those operational, I think, structural questions are stuff that's still being worked out. But we have a
Yeah.
plan. We'll execute on a plan, and we'll probably need to change a few things along the way as we start implementing it and realizing that, okay, maybe that's not quite optimal.
So, if you were to think back over the last 10 years, how has the organization kind of grown? And are there milestones that you can look back on now and say, wow, this is a really big jump, or that was a really important time for us?
I can't think of a single thing that was like a huge,
Mm,
leap from where we were. I would say the biggest thing will probably be what we're doing now,
okay.
with the merger of the company. This is the one that, changes the playing field, right? In terms of the
Yeah.
scope of activities that we're doing. COVID was an interesting time as well. I think that was
Mm,
when we had to think about operational efficiencies, rather
mhm.
than just scale. So previously it was just how do we get bigger, how do we grow? But then with COVID, it was just like, okay, how do we turn cash flow positive and reduce our burn rate and all of that? That made us a lot more efficient as an organization. And I think a lot of the lessons from that we still adopt today.
What has been your path over the last 10 years as a founder? I can imagine you've changed your hats from trying to kill your family with the first bars to, developing merger and future market opportunities. How have you grown through this path of entrepreneurship?
The constant question of what's most useful for the organization, right?
Okay.
And what's the thing that I can do most right now that's the most beneficial. Not to say I don't get my hands dirty from time to time. I think when it calls
Yeah.
for it, when stuff's on fire, that's when I turn on the operational hat again and go like, okay, right, now let's go there and try to fix it.
What have been some of the greatest joys or the greatest challenges of being a founder?
Okay, actually, for both those things, it has to do with people.
Yeah.
Working with people is really challenging because there's
Mhm.
no prescription for it, right? Each individual
Right,
is
right,
different,
right.
and then you have an idea of how you want people to grow, how you want people to thrive within an organization, but then the way that it works for each individual is going to be different. But that has
Mhm.
also been the most rewarding. My first two employees, the one that I talked about, the one on the production, helping on the production floor, and my designer, they're still with me today.
Yeah.
And seeing how they've grown and evolved over the years into positions of leadership and to people who are amazing at what they do. So that's been the most fulfilling to
Awesome.
see that, if you've had the opportunity to kind of identify different sparks in people and their potential and somehow have played a part in helping to bring that out, that's amazing to me. That's the most fulfilling thing.
Did you ever dream of having two or three friends involved in this that were true co-founders and they could take off different pieces? Or was being a solo founder, like, was that the experience that you really enjoy?
I actually started with a co-founder, but he exited the business 5 years in. So he started as an investor and then became an active
Mm,
co-founder and then exited the business as well, because I think we were just had different directions. So I would say when it's the right co-founder, when we're aligned, it was definitely easier. And I think one of the things that I'm really happy about this merger process as well is having another person that I can problem solve at the same level. So that's definitely
yeah.
very helpful, and I do appreciate that a lot. I would say that it has to be the right person and the right individual. That you have complementary skill sets, that you have a lot of mutual respect, and you're heading towards the same direction. When that's not aligned, it actually is easier to be a solo person at the realm at the wheel, rather than trying to, solve the issue of like misalignment at the top and then trying to run the organization at the same time.
How do you maintain passion and how do you find growth personally after 10 years? Like what do you do? How do you look at the organization? How do you keep going on this mission when it's a challenging mission to be delivering. How do you keep yourself centered, passionate, and find ways for personal growth?
I don't think we'll ever solve the problem. But I think for us, I need to feel like we've made a dent and we've made a difference and we've moved the conversation somewhat, right? That people
Okay.
can look at Krakakawa slow and say, okay, that's a different way of doing business that works both from a financial perspective and allows the share of the benefits, allows sharing of the benefits with other stakeholders within the value chain, and is also planet and climate positive. If we are able to move that conversation and inspire bigger companies to say like, okay, you know what, we have obligations to deliver good returns to our shareholders, but this model allows that to happen as well. So there's something that we can try there. That to me would move the needle. So at some point in time, hopefully that's, it becomes something that people look to as an example of how business can be done differently. I'm very one track minded when it comes to certain things. When I have a North Star, I kind of stick with it. So yeah, this is my North Star right now.
All right, last question. You're speaking to an aspiring, mission-driven entrepreneur. Some key piece of advice or some things that you wish you knew before you got started on your journey, with the idea that you would help them get a little bit further along their own path.
So I think first question is, what are you trying to build? Are you trying to build something that is scalable, or where do you see yourself in 5 years time? Or is it a particular solution? It's just something that's localized, and both are okay, and don't get trapped into the temptation of having to build the next whatever
Yeah.
and scale it and have it be really big. Second thing is probably understanding your why as well. Why are you trying to do this? I mean, it's a bit cliche, but I think it's true. When things get really challenging and really really bleak, that's where you really need to tap into that and really find your purpose and understand your purpose, and that's the thing
Yeah.
that keeps you going. Being true and having an honest conversation with yourself, like, why are you doing this, right? And it has to be a
Right.
good
Right.
enough reason that's part of your core and your identity and your being, and that's going to keep you going. Thirdly, as well, is thinking about your support structures, and your and what's going to help allow you to continue the journey when it gets challenging. Do you have the personal runway to keep going? And I think that's a reflection of your personal situation and your consumption needs and all of that. But then kind of being really true about that as well. And what are the support systems around you that actually helps you get through?